Today on the Doherty podcast, coronavirus continues its harmful spread. Surpassing 750,000 cases worldwide, COVID-19 is having massive medical and political effects around the globe. In the United States, President Donald Trump signed off on the recent congressional stimulus bill worth more than $2 trillion. Despite this legislation, which won't go into effect for weeks, millions of Americans have filed for unemployment, the economy continues to perform poorly despite massive interventions, and citizens around the world are fearful for what is to come. With all this uncertainty, it is important to ask, what are the experts saying? How's the government reacting? And what should you do to stay safe? We'll answer all that and more on this special edition of the Doherty podcast.
This is a special edition of the Doherty podcast. And now from Chicago, here's your host, Doherty.
That is correct, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's episode number 130 of the Doherty podcast, a special coronavirus edition. It's going to be a little bit shorter of an episode this evening as we come on the air. It is a little bit of a later episode as well. We're starting about 6 p.m. today, and there is a lot to talk about. Before we get into any of the news that we're going to go over and hopefully provide to you, and a little bit shorter in terms of episodes, but more frequent in terms of publication of these episodes, I want to let you know that if you are an iTunes or a Pocket Cast user, two of the best podcast directories and the most widely used podcast directories for this podcast, you can now navigate the timestamps of this podcast, the specific podcast, via the new chapters feature or our recently debuted timestamps feature on j-doherty.com. So the new chapters feature is something that debuted through all podcasts on specifically Pocket Casts and iTunes and maybe a couple other directories. But if you use those specifically, you can now navigate through specific topics on this podcast. And if you listen on the website, which I know also a lot of people do, and I encourage you to go check out the new redesign that we just published over there at j-doherty.com, JAY-DOHERTY.com. You'll be able to look and see the new timestamps feature that we have just below the episodes in the show notes, and we now, instead of doing the show notes embedded into the podcast as we did before in the show, in the actual description box, we do it in a separate PDF for you, so you can easily download it. You don't have to constantly go back. You can download it, have it in your file system, look at it on your phone, on your computer, anywhere, and you don't even have to be connected to the internet. So all of that is new, and I encourage you to read all of what we're doing to change and improve the podcast henceforth. You can find the show notes at JAY-DOHERTY.com/130. We begin, though, today with your numbers update on coronavirus. There's currently 777,286 confirmed cases. As of Monday, March 30th at 6 p.m., there's 37,140 deaths around the world, and there are 164,446 recovered cases. The United States leads in terms of the actual cases by country, region, and sovereignty, but Italy remains in the lead in terms of deaths. Thankfully, the United States has not increased monumentally, at least, in terms of deaths, even in terms of rankings of deaths. But Italy continues to be in the top at 11,591, trailing them is Spain, China, France, and Iran. So those are the current numbers that you'll be able to find at the Coronavirus Resource Center from Johns Hopkins University, and that's your numbers update. A concerning update that also came was from the New York Times, which actually shows that 100,000 cases of coronavirus are now in the United States. There's now 100,000 known coronavirus cases, and the New York Times says earlier this week the country surpassed the case totals in China and Italy. The number of known cases has grown rapidly in recent days as testing ramped up after weeks of widespread shortages and delays. The outbreak has already transformed life in the United States, where millions of Americans have been asked to go into what might have been unthinkable only a week or two ago. Don't go to work, don't go to school, don't leave the house, except in limited circumstances. And this really has changed American life. And, I mean, really, we're seeing these effects really play into what experts are actually saying and what experts are recommending. Because this week, I think it was on over the weekend, Sunday, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's sort of the point man on coronavirus, he's the top infectious disease expert in the country. He said that he estimated that 100,000 to 200,000 Americans, specifically Americans, could die from the coronavirus. Not just contract it, but actually die from it. NPR says the nation's leading expert on infectious disease and member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force says the pandemic could kill 100 to 200,000 Americans and infect millions. He said based on modeling of the current pace of coronavirus spread in the United States, that many people could die. He said that on CNN State of the Union. We'll have updated coverage on that and also talk about what the models actually mean, because largely the CDC models have actually been confidential until now, so we're just learning more about the statistics of what is actually happening right now with the coronavirus and the actual number of cases. What we do know, and thankfully this was signed in way more officially than I actually thought, the coronavirus stimulus bill was put into action, and it was passed, as I said, way more efficiently, even though it sort of was stalling in the Senate for a while. Went through the House in less than 48 hours, and it went to the White House shortly after that. In fact, Trump signed it on the same day it passed the House, as he promised, which was good because it was on a Friday, which is obviously before a weekend, so you didn't have to push it off much longer. It was passed through the House, passed through the Senate, passed through Congress, and onto his desk. So, after making its way through the Senate...
In this vote, the yeas are 96, the nays are 0. The 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the bill is passed.
And then it had to go right through the House and be passed by the House, which it was.
The question is on adoption of the motion. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
And then through the White House, and where it was actually signed by President Trump. Those are the sound effects of a pen scribbling his signature. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to include that because we needed to have a uniformity in our sound bites. Anyway, the COVID-19 stimulus bill, more formally known and referred to by the president as the CARES Act, which you can read at j-doherty.com/CARES Act. It's a very long bill, hundreds of pages long, and it outlines exactly what the stimulus bill is doing. Of course, we talked about that on episode number 129 of the Jay Doherty podcast, which you can find at j-doherty.com/129. But just to quickly recap, the major areas that these funds, which is over $2.2 trillion in specific cash to certain industries and in certain places, or allocations these funds are going to. There's an additional, Trump said there was $6.6 trillion in total of actual money that the Fed is going to be injecting and other economic sectors, the relief that they're going to feel. It is a very large, very huge bill. It's the largest spending bill in the history of not only the United States, but also the entire world. We'll just provide a quick refresher of what's actually happening. The majority of the money that is being spent is going to go to large businesses and local government loans. That's $504 billion. Small business assistance is going to be $377 billion. One-time checks to everyday Americans is going to be $290 billion. Business tax cuts, $280 billion. Expanded unemployment benefits, $260 billion. Health spending is going to be $180 billion, and aid to state and local governments is going to be $175 billion. There's a bunch of other ones. You can see the entire graph on the show notes at j-doherty.com/130 if you want. An interesting thing that you really have to read the fine print on that I saw about this particular stimulus bill is that there are a lot of there's a lot of strings attached for corporate companies, as we talked about on the previous episode. It was sort of like the Democrats came into this saying, look, this came into the Republicans who initially proposed it in the Senate and said, look, this thing is way too corporation friendly. We need to make it more people friendly. And it ended up being that actually the corporations got $504 billion. It's a little bit more than that's actually a lot more than what Republicans originally proposed. But what Democrats did is they said, no, we're going to put a bunch of strings attached on these loans and make it a little bit more fair in terms of distribution, because the original Trump proposal, I believe, had significantly, it was a couple $100 billion, but it was not $500 billion, because I know that $504 billion as the one is right now, because I know that the original Republican proposal had $500 billion going specifically to Americans with one-time checks. The updated bill only has $290 billion going specifically to one-time checks, but there's a lot of other added benefits that are going to trickle down to Americans, particularly within unemployment. So it does even itself out, and it was actually a really good accomplishment. But it is very important to note that you cannot receive benefits if you are a child who's 17 or 18 years old. Many college students will not qualify if you're between the ages of 19 and 23. You can also not receive benefits if you can be claimed as a dependent. If you're an adult and you can be claimed as a dependent. Non-resident aliens, that's what the bill says. In other words, those without a green card, estates, individuals who earn more than $99,000, or married couples earning more than $198,000. It's a lot of money to be excluded. You could literally get, I think it was at least $10. You could get $10 from the government if you get if you make $198,000. I mean, it's a six-figure salary, and you're getting money from the government. I don't know. That's a little bit crooked in my opinion. Anyway, people who haven't filed 2018 and 2019 tax returns will also just be completely ineligible to receive funds. Now, I suppose these are necessary requirements because you do have to partition the money out fairly and make sure that there is some sort of system of record keeping. But nonetheless, it took a long time for Congress to pass this bill, particularly within the Senate, as I talked about last week. But I was actually really happy and honestly surprised to see that the House actually got this bill passed so quickly. The Senate took very long, too long in my opinion. It should have been passed the weekend before it was, then moved to the House over the weekend, onto President Trump's desk by Monday. But it did not. The House got it passed the next Friday, early afternoon, last Friday, about 1 or 2 p.m. Washington time. But it was not without the annoyingly unwelcome confusion of Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie, who, quote, infuriated members in both parties by bringing them back to Washington amid uncertainty over whether he would request a full roll call vote. That uncertainty forced many to travel during the public health emergency simply to deny his demand in order to ensure swift passage of the measure on Friday, as CNN puts it. That was sort of like just throwing a lot of information. Basically, what happened is this bill was going swimmingly. It was actually, there was a lot of partisanship initially, but they sort of came to both parties actually did a really good job coming to a consensus about how to work this out in a bipartisan way and a bipartisan efforts. And then all of a sudden, this guy who's no one's ever heard of, named Thomas Massie, representative from a district in Kentucky, stands up and says, "No, you can't vote on this bill because there's some negligible procedure in the bylaws of Congress that don't allow you to do this." When people are literally dying for this, and the CNN article that I just read to you was a little bit complicated in the way it was written. But in simple terms, Massie tried to make a name for himself personally by abusing this negligible procedure while people are dying for this stimulus to be passed and to receive the benefits that it will give out to not only people but also businesses. And I was actually hesitant when I saw this story, when I was watching this live. I was hesitant to talk about this. I was hesitant to give this doofus airtime. But here's Massie actually interrupting the announcement of the vote. In context, the speaker asking him, it just looks bad, and you could tell the vibe in the room just got very awkward because no one sitting behind him, and again, this is on the House floor, by the way, no one sitting behind him liked Massie, and you could just tell by the tone of the room. You could probably hear it through the audio. Here is the speaker requesting the vote and Massie interrupting.
The question is on adoption of the motion. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
And that's Massie.
For purposes, gentlemen, seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I came here to make sure our republic doesn't die by unanimous consent in an empty chamber, and I request a recorded vote.
Literally no one applauds or anything.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise and remain standing until counted.
Not a single person rises.
An insufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is refused.
Mr. Speaker.
Is the gentleman recognized?
I object on the basis that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
The eye rolls continue.
The chair will count for a quorum. Counted for a quorum is present. The motion is adopted.
There we go. And everyone gets happy, and Massie actually stormed
Without
off.
Objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Section 7B of House Resolution 891, the House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. on Tuesday, March 31st, 2020.
Yeah, okay, so everyone was very proud to see Massie actually exit. He was so mad when you could just see the video. He gets out of there before anyone can personally attack him, but he was not happy when that happened. And really, I think one has to recognize that he was clearly disliked by his fellow Washingtonians after he did this. And remember, this guy is a Republican, and even Trump actually went after him. This guy, they're both the members of the same party. They're both Republicans. Trump went after him on Twitter, as he frequently does, at 8:44 a.m. on the 27th of March, saying, "Looks like a third-rate grandstander named Representative Thomas Massie, a congressman from, unfortunately, a truly great state, Kentucky, wants to vote against the new Save Our Workers bill in Congress. He just wants the publicity. He can't stop it, only delay it, which is both dangerous and costly. Workers and small businesses need money now in order to survive. The virus wasn't their fault. It is HELL dealing with the Democrats. had to give up some stupid things in order to get the big picture done. 90% great, win back the House, but throw Massey out of the Republican Party, says Trump on Twitter. He does know how to write an insult, as we've seen many, many times in the past. But he has just been so constantly mendacious in delivering, news about the coronavirus. He just contradicted his own experts. We'll talk about that in a second, as we did on the previous episode. But let's get back to Massey for a second, because I could not stop writing and could not stop forming opinions on this guy, because people, a very small percent, maybe 2% of the people who've watched that clip sort of think that this guy is really a true intellect who's trying to save America by implementing negligible procedures in Congress, when that's really not the case. I mean, this move was not to try and uphold some liberty or promote justice within, bureaucracy or anything. It was clearly to get attention for himself. I would not be playing this if he didn't do that. CNN would not be playing it. Fox News would not be playing it. Not a single, radio station would be playing it. He got attention. He got exactly what he wanted. It was almost all negative. But if you head over to his Twitter statistics, which you can find at j-doherty.com/Massey-stats, you'll be able to see that he has had a 748.6% increase in the amount of followers in the last 30 days. If you say that is not connected to his stupidity on the House floor, I don't know what I don't know if it's really stupid. I think it's more just annoyance and publicity. I hesitate to say stupidity, because I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He was just being a goon. And it's really sad to see that this attention-seeking man could just disrespect the floor of the House, the institution of Congress, gain all these followers, and then start being invited to big radio shows, which he's promoting to his new followers. So he's just been in this echo chamber of success because he just wasted time on the House floor, and it was not good to see. More broadly, and far more importantly, though, Congress as an institution has once again proved me wrong, because I thought that they were going to be much slower than they have proven themselves to be in the past. I did not think that it would be unreasonable to have them delay the bill until the following week. Of course, they didn't, and the bill was passed. I thought that maybe today would be the day that they would pass the bill, or even tomorrow if the House continued their negotiations, because a lot of it really didn't even have to do congressionally. I mean, the Democrats clearly had a majority. They could have forked that over. They probably really what they were fighting for was to get provisions that restrict Trump and his family and the people in the top administration from abusing it, from abusing coronavirus, from profiting off of it personally. That was really what Democrats were fighting for. But secondarily, they were coordinating with local governments. Both Democrats and Republicans were coordinating with local governments to try and put provisions and procedures in to make sure that local governments, particularly of a large scale like New York with Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, they were assisted in a way that would specifically help them as people and as governors of municipalities, because that was really what they were working for. And that was a struggle that the Senate had. That was a struggle that the Democrats and the Republicans in the House had. It was a very clear struggle on both sides, and it looks like they were able to at least, congressionally form some sort of partisanship together. Anyway, I did not think it was unreasonable to have them delay it till the following week. They didn't. The bill was passed, and really that's all that matters, considering that the same week, Trump said that he would sign it immediately. And signed it immediately he has, with the amusing aggregate of Mike Pence, Mitch McConnell, Stephen Mnuchin, Kevin McCarthy, Elaine Chao, Larry Kudlow, a couple others standing behind him, the classics plus a couple medical experts. President Trump proudly signed this bill into effect and couldn't help but make some typical billionaire conman jokes while he was at it.
Now I'm going to sign this, and it's a great honor. $6.2 trillion. I've never signed anything with a T on it. I don't know if I can handle this one, Mitch. We can't chicken out at this point, can we? I don't think so, huh? All right, thank you all.
There's that sound effect once again, in its full glory. Okay, so that was really good to see, and I'm actually glad that the president and everyone in Congress were able to work together on both sides a bit more efficiently than I had presumed. I was very surprised, very delighted actually to see that there was such a bipartisan turnaround. In fact, as we talked about before, I don't want to waste your time anymore, but Mitch McConnell had a phenomenal speech, and of course he contributes so much to the partisanship that there is, or the unnecessary bad partisanship that there is. But he did give a nice speech about how to write your headlines in terms of partisanship and overall, what Congress has done, the momentous achievements that they have accomplished as a result of this COVID-19 bill, and how it sort of brought the Congress overall as an institution more together. And so that is very good. What's not good is that there is some very sad predictions that were made by Anthony Fauci on Sunday. Now, I'm obviously no medical expert whatsoever, but Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the #1 infectious disease man in the country, said on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper that it would not be unreasonable to suggest that between 100,000 and 200,000 people in the United States alone could not just contract COVID-19, but also die from COVID-19, based off of models that the CDC has completed. Now, Fauci said that these medical models were created by merging statistics and the assumptions of those statistics, or not the assumptions of the statistics, but the statistics and then the addition of those assumptions really make the models, and they output best case scenario models and worst case scenario models. He basically said that the assumptions that you have, or the predictions that you have as a person or from observing empirical data beforehand, inform how good the models are. I mean, I think the word he used was the models are only as good as your predictions or your assumptions. So, you can't specifically know exactly what these models are going to turn out to be, but basically in the time that he's dealt with viruses, the outcome has never been a worst case scenario outcome or a best case scenario outcome. So what they do is they average and they take somewhere in the middle. Fauci said that a middle of the road estimate would be somewhere between 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, but it mildly backpedaled, probably in the attempt to just not panic people, saying that he could be wrong. Here's Fauci on CNN on Sunday.
I would say between 100 and 200,000 cases, but I don't want to be held to that because it's deaths. I mean, we're going to have millions of cases, but I just don't think that we really need to make a projection when it's such a moving target that you can so easily be wrong.
And I mean, regardless of how confident these doctors are in their models or models from the organizations that they work for, it is certainly disconcerting to see this level, this percentage of death. But the good news is that social distancing and hand washing and, taking steps to actually prevent this virus actively as a human being, even if you don't have it, if you think you can't get it, if you don't have a pre-existing condition or something like that, doing things that the government is encouraging you to do, like stay inside, like social distancing, like not hanging out in large groups of people, it is working, and experts continue to recommend doing both of those things regularly. You may remember last episode when I talked about how on Fox News, on a Fox News virtual town hall, as they deemed it, Trump wanted to reinstate the economy fully within the United States by Easter, which is April 12th. But all the reports coming from the CDC, from the World Health Organizations, from the New York Times, and others say that, I'm no expert, but my prediction and my assumption, just like everyone else's pretty much except for Trump's, was, and continues to be, I only say was because Trump has changed since then, that it would be foolishly dangerous to reopen the economy during a worldwide pandemic because people would go back, people would feel mandated to go back, then more people would get sick, and then there would be larger shutdowns, and it would just be horrible. So Trump wanted originally, the past week, he wanted to have the entire economy way back up by Easter, April 12th. To remind you in context, here's President Trump on Fox News actually saying that he wants to open the economy by Easter, April 12th, on the Fox News town hall last week.
I'd love to have it open by Easter. Okay, I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now. I would love to have that. It's such an important day for other reasons, but I'll make it an important day for this too. I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
Now, he's changed his mind, saying recently at a more formal press conference that was clearly pre-scripted that he is extending social distancing guidelines per the recommendation of experts in the United States until at least April 30th of this year. Here's Trump.
The better you do, the faster this whole nightmare will end. Therefore, we will be extending our guidelines to April 30th to slow the spread. On Tuesday, we will be finalizing these plans and providing a summary of our findings, supporting data, and strategy to the American people.
All right, so I'm glad that he clarified, but in my mind, even initially, there was no way, absolutely no way that Trump could, successfully open the economy back up by April 12th, by Easter. So it's good to see that he sort of rolled back on those statements, not only on a practical level, but also on a factual level, because the New York Times, Michael Shear, says that Mr. Trump said repeatedly last week that he wanted to reverse such drastic measures soon, perhaps by Easter, in the hopes of restarting the economy. But public health experts, including the president's own advisors, had warned that trying to return to normal life too quickly risked allowing the virus to rage, increasing the likelihood of more infections and raising the number of deaths. The president finally appeared on Sunday to acknowledge the possibility of deaths on a large scale and back down from weeks of insisting that the threat from the virus might be overblown. In the past month, Mr. Trump has vacillated between accepting the need for aggressive action to limit the pandemic and complaining that such moves will harm the economy. Then, on Sunday, his mood seemed so somber as he conceded the need for another month of collective pain, citing figures from his advisors that showed that as many as 200,000 people could die from the virus, even if the country took aggressive action to show its spread. Mr. Trump said that the restrictions must continue, even if it meant more sacrifice in the days ahead. And that is something that really needs to be done. The country should remain closed so we can, if we're going to do something, we should do it right. Trump obviously has no idea what that means. He's done things, even though it's a facade of expense, it's generally done very cheaply in his mind, so he doesn't know how to do things right. The way that you need to do things right is wait until everything's done, wait until the damage is done, then reopen, then start rebuilding, and not band-aid it like he suggested in Easter. And I think he's learned his lesson. I think, a lot of economists have learned that you have to slow things down and not everything, you can get analysis paralysis after a while, just looking at the numbers and how this is going to affect, and just totally neglect the existence of people's livelihoods and the medicine and actual medical facts and statistics, including the models that were just the dangerous and deathly models that were just presented by the CDC. So anyway, even though in the past we've seen Trump's fiscal inclinations override medical logic, the fact that social distancing and the prolonging of isolation as a whole entire concept is going to have massive effects on the economy, hopefully we'll not need to have more stimulus packages put into place in the future, but I could certainly see that a sort of fiscal invigoration from the government, in addition to these multi-trillion-dollar package just put forth by Congress, I could certainly see that as a possibility in the near future, and it's something that's really dangerous, in my opinion. What also can be dangerous is the unintentional consequences of social distancing that come on a practical level, because Trump just recommended, and just like the government is recommending wholly, that you continue to social distance overall until April 30th. It's basically the end of April. And the nationally urged social distancing guidelines also have effect on the practical level of workers and students across America. For example, no school in the entire country is going back till April 30th, and it's very feasible in my mind to predict that no schools will be going back to school for this year at all. And that really, poses major concerns in terms of education, obviously, but also accessibility. I mean, and the local governments have to ask themselves, what local infrastructure do they need to distribute laptops and internet to students who don't have it? How can students stay safe? How can you enforce social distancing guidelines even if people are learning from home? I mean, these are all complicated questions that the world has never really dealt with before on such a large mandated scale, and in questions that local governments around the nation are going to have to ask themselves, because this is really a huge threat of unprecedented scale, and the infrastructure and the actual bureaucracy that people are having to face, even on a federal level, is really staggering. I mean, we'll see with these, first, two things, really, and we'll talk about municipalities in a second, but it's very dangerous to see that, for example, on the stimulus bill, if you qualify for money to be given to you, it will take a long time for the IRS to actually give the money to you, and to actually get that money either in a direct deposit takes about 3 weeks, according to Stephen Mnuchin, who's working with the IRS, and it takes even longer if you don't have a direct deposit account. You need to have the checks mailed to you. It can take up to many, many months in order for the money to actually get to you. The infrastructure that takes to send money to people, I mean, it is at such a large scale, is very, very scary. And you have to do all the work about tax returns, making sure you qualify. The government's always going to try and not give you as much money as they can. I mean, that's just like all businesses would. And And we've seen, it's just going to be complicated overall on a federal level. It's going to be even more complicated on a local level because they don't have as much support. We have seen local governments, though, for example, take action on how to assist students who will be learning online. For example, Chicago, where I happen to be right now, the school system here plans to distribute 100,000 laptops, iPads, and Chromebooks for students to use at home, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. The good news, though, also, specifically within Chicago, probably in similar parts of the country, is that AT&T and Comcast, obviously big communication giants, are offering free internet for high school students in what the Sun-Times deems high-need families. So that's good. I mean, I was always concerned because the headline of this article is, laptops, iPads, and Chromebooks, but all of those things are useless if you don't have an internet connection. So it's good to see that the government the big corporations are being somewhat generous in their providing of internet and resources to people who need them. But nonetheless, we will still see this virus affect the ongoings of municipal governments in, more so than before. And we've also seen it in federal and state governments. We've seen it in municipal governments. We've seen it in the federal government. And in the coming days, we're going to, see the struggles that local governments are going to endure. And it's hard, it's scary, but that's what we'll, see in the future. And that sort of extension to local governments, obviously big cities, huge cities like Chicago, like New York, like Los Angeles, those are all feeling the impacts right now because the mayors have to stand up, the aldermen or city council people have to stand up, but in smaller cities, even cities that have about 500,000 people, and I know there's tons of cities across this country, that's going to be a huge infrastructure problem for the mayor. So you better hope you have a good mayor in your city or good people to manage, good head of education, because it is a big challenge to deal with that sort of thing. And it's very hard, if you are in their shoes, to form an actual plan that will end up proving to be useful. So we'll see what happens. I hope it goes well, but really the shift in strategy from going to federal to local, it's a big shift, and I hope the world and the people who live in cities, or anywhere really that has a mayor, which is almost every territory in the United States, it'll be a challenge, and I just hope it goes well. What may contribute to it not going well is the fact that so many people are losing their jobs, or at least filing for unemployment because of coronavirus and because of the economic effects that it is having. We saw last week that unemployment filings spiked based off of a recent report from the Department of Labor that said a record 3.28 million people have filed for unemployment in the last week alone. Huge spike, almost more than 3 times actually, I think, than the 2008 recession. But this week we've seen even more distressing predictions coming from the Federal Reserve. In fact, the CNBC headline is that coronavirus job losses could take a total 47 million jobs. Unemployment could hit 32%. According to the Fed. They say there are nearly 67 million Americans working in jobs that are at high risk of layoffs, according to the analysis. The St. Louis Fed President James Bullard said last week that the initial estimates are grim, but the plunge should be short-lived. That's the thing. There will be a huge, in my opinion, or my predictive analysis, there will be huge layoffs, huge numbers of layoffs, very distressing to see the amount of layoffs and firings that there will be, or furloughs, more likely, that there will be. But hopefully, and I think pragmatically, the people who will be laid off are going to be able to regain their jobs quickly on larger scales. On brick-and-mortar businesses that are having to shut down, hopefully these businesses can shut down temporarily. That would sort of be a best-case scenario for many people in most cases. But overall, I think unemployment will spike to maybe 3 million in terms of actual lost jobs. But I would say that at least 75% of the people who will be laid off will be able to get back into their jobs, particularly within big corporations and not even big corporations, but big stores, big chains like Macy's, for example. I think they've furloughed almost all, if not all, of their employees. But once this thing is over, at least in a large scale, they'll be able to reemploy their employees, get back into business, and continue to exist as a company. Now, hopefully, not all companies will make it through it, but hopefully that will be the case. Hopefully we'll see an outcome similar to that. And that's really all that we can hope for right now, because it is very unpredictable, and a lot of it depends actually on the scale of the virus and how much more we learn about the transmissibility of it. Because if there's more viruses, then it affects everything else. It affects the government. Well, it infects the government too, but it affects the government, it affects the federal government, affects the economy, affects the local government, the state government, affects everything. This virus is far-reaching and wide-reaching, and we are going to monitor it all here for you on the Jay Doherty Podcast. The Jay Doherty Podcast actually has show notes and episode highlights, which you can find for every episode on the website, j-doherty.com. We have a brand new redesign. It looks really good, in my opinion. You can go check it out at j-doherty.com/jdpodcast. We have a downloadable PDF file for each episode henceforth, which makes it a bit easier to follow along while you listen. I know I talk sort of fast, but you'll be able to follow along with each episode while you listen. Or if you can't listen, it's the closest thing to a transcript. So you have it right there. So please go make your life easier and support the show for totally free. Go to j-doherty.com and check out what we have going on over there with our our show notes, which is the closest thing we have to a transcript. The phone number for this podcast is 312-625-8492. You can receive emails and newsletter updates every single week at j-doherty.com/newsletter. See show notes and episode highlights at j-doherty.com, clips and highlights at thedohertyfiles.com. This has been a JD Media Network production. Thanks so much for listening. The Jay Doherty Podcast is written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jay Doherty. The Jay Doherty Podcast is recorded in the studios of the JD Media Network. The Jay Doherty Podcast is a JD Media Network production. Copyright Jay Doherty 2020. Make sure to listen to other JD Media Network productions like the JDRC Politics Podcast for discussions on international politics, or the Weekly File Podcast for all the news, just the facts. Learn more and hear more of this content at j-doherty.com or view archive clips and show highlights at thedohertyfiles.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Jay Doherty Podcast.
For all the latest world and national news on technology, politics, and more, listen live to the Jay Doherty Podcast on j-doherty.com. The JD Media Network.